And let's face it, rebranding can be daunting. It's not just about a new logo or fancy fonts. It's about reshaping how people see your company and setting the tone for the future. And is the kind of situation where you can mess things up big time.
This is Melanie.
And this is Christian.
You're listening to Follow the Gradient, the weekly podcast with actionable insights about how to build a business while staying sane. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today we're trying something a little bit different. Normally we jump straight into the interview, but Christian and I wanted to take a moment and chat about our own experience with this particular topic. It's a topic that almost every startup founder or operator will deal with at some point in their career. A rebranding, which can also include a renaming, but we will talk about that later. Let's put it this way. In our opinion, it's not the easiest thing to get right.
Yeah, and Melanie, you know this firsthand, right? When Yokoy transitioned from expense robot mid-2020, it wasn't just a name change, it was a whole repositioning of the company. I joined then right after the rebrand, and it was clear how much thought had gone into it. And let's face it, rebranding can be daunting. It's not just about a new logo or fancy fonts. It's about reshaping how people see your company and setting the tone for the future. And I want to be honest here. For me, as not being a marketing person, brand is something super hard to grasp and super hard to measure. I mean, yes, we all know these big brands like Coca-Cola, Apple, Nike, Sephora, whose names so many people on the planet know and can attach values to them. But for a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old startup, brand value for me is something very hard to pinpoint. Although I also admit that without a rebrand or without a brand, things wouldn't go anywhere, right? So equally, it also comes very intuitive to me that changing your brand creates friction and challenges and is the kind of situation where you can mess things up big time.
Exactly. And startups in particular, I find, often rebrand for various reasons and sometimes also different reasons than, for example, established brands. And among the top 3 reasons that I would say that come to my mind are first, signaling a major shift in the business, like entering a new market or launching a new product or even undergoing a merger. Secondly, I would say addressing a change in target audience or fixing a very negative perception. And thirdly, and after under thought of point is the trademark issue, which often forces startups to rebrand. For instance, if your name is too generic or already owned by someone else, and there the startup might face a lot of legal challenges if they stick to the name. So for Andrea, our guest today, that will join us later, the rebranding was about aligning a sub-brand with an existing corporate identity, which had its own advantages. But for startups, rebranding and renaming usually means creating something from scratch. And that's what we will tackle today in our discussion together, the two of us. And we will put it in 5 steps. So planning as the first one, preparation period, the execution phase, the launch phase, and as the 5th phase, the post-launch, or as I like to call it, the future. Now, let's kick off with the planning phase. One of the first questions founders ask is, when is the right time to rebrand? And I can share a little bit how it was with Yokoy. Back then, the decision was basically driven by necessity. Expense robot, as we were called, just didn't capture our vision anymore. And after we added the card option and planned to also introduce invoices to our range of products, the old name was no longer suitable and really started to restrict ourselves. Also, I must admit that it was very generic name and it was a name that really couldn't be trademarked.
Yeah, and what I remember very vividly back then was that I saw the impact almost immediately. I mean, the new name created a clearer, bigger identity for the company. And timing is really critical here. Whether you're entering a new market, launching a major product, or if your current brand just doesn't align with where you want to head or where you want to go. An example here for me is the fintech TransferWise, which renamed itself to Wise in 2021. Their name reflected their expanded mission of borderless money management and not just transfers.
Yeah, that's a really great example. I like that. Maybe we also talk about a very recent and maybe a little bit more polarizing example, the one with Twitter that rebranded to X last year. And I know that some see it as a bold and very modern move, but also a lot of people view it as a complete failure. Under Elon Musk's leadership, the platform shifted from a beloved, very iconic brand to something that many users feel doesn't really represent what the platform does and stand for. I know, and also when I read comments and articles about it, like users were really attached to the things like tweets and retweets, and that it was also related to the board. And those terms were replaced by this very generic posts and reposts that every other platform has. And this is also why you often see people referring to, yes, let's meet on X, or what I would like to call Twitter. So you can see there is a lot of emotion still involved. And on top of that, for some, the new name X feels quite disconnected from the platform's purpose. It's, I would say, an example of what can happen when user sentiment and also brand identity are really overlooked, I feel.
Yeah, on the other hand, you have the flip side, right? That some argue that the rebrand has positioned X as something larger than a social platform. And I think part of the vision of Elon Musk is for X to be an everything app. So whether it's a success or failure, I guess that remains to be seen. But it does underscore the importance of tying your rebrand to a clear strategy and clear purpose.
Absolutely. And let's put it this way. I guess that the key takeaway from these two examples is that a rebrand should really solve a problem and align with the future vision. And if it doesn't resonate with your audience or feels rushed, it can cause more harm than good and is really not worth pursuing, I would say.
Now let's go to the second step, the preparation. Once you decide to rebrand, the preparation phase is all about getting organized. This includes getting buy-in from stakeholders, which can be pretty tricky. How can this be tackled? Melanie, you have executed this. What would you advise?
To be very honest, it's very easy now to say in hindsight how you would tackle that. So always take it also from my older and wiser self. I didn't always follow what I now tell you, but we are doing this for sharing purposes. So I would say start with the data. Show why the rebrand is necessary. Show metrics like shifting customer perceptions or new market opportunities. These are metrics that can be really compelling with the stakeholders. Also, when talking with investors, it can be important to clearly state the financial aspect of brand equity. So to give an example, the brand alone of Apple is 488 billion and Tesla and Instagram over 45 billion. And this is really impressive. And of course, if you are a pre-product market fit company, the brand is not the first worry, I would say, that you have. But still, building up a brand starts from day one. And so I still stand behind the fact that the brand is truly crucial. But back to your questions about stakeholders, I would say don't forget to involve the key players early on, be it investors, team leads, even trusted customers. But here is the catch. Avoid involving too many cooks or too many people, because what I can definitely say is decision by committee waters everything down and leads to a very generic, not very distinctive brand, in my opinion.
I mean, when I think about startups now, I also think about limited resources. And I think for the preparation phase, right, that's also exactly the time when you want to set budgets and create a governance system.
And there's another thing that I think in hindsight is something that would have helped me during Yokoy's rebranding. It's that it would be very helpful to actually create a rebranding playbook. So basically a structured, centralized document that outlines every key aspect of the process and that every stakeholder has access to.
How would such a playbook actually look like?
Just be clear, if you're a one-woman show, don't overdo it. Perfection is the worst enemy. But I think it should cover the why behind the rebrand. So clearly stating why you're doing all this hassle, your core mission and vision. Also ask yourself what success could look like. I think it should also include your brand elements like logos, taglines. Also, if you have templates and guidelines at this stage, and really how the brand should and shouldn't be used in the future. And finally, I think it should have a timeline. I think that is a very, very important key. You can always kind of shift weeks and adapt it, but to have a timeline so that everyone knows what is coming, and really then have a communication strategy for both internal and external rollouts. And as we already mentioned, like really a system to measure success. And if you wonder how this all looks like in practice, when I did the research for this episode, I came across this really nice video series, and I can highly recommend it. It's called Rebranding in Public, and it's about the company ConvertKit, whose founder decided to rebrand and rename his company to Kit. They announced that in 2024 in June. And they said that they would do the whole process together with his team, together with the whole community in public. We will add the link to our show notes so you can check it out for yourself. But now, enough about the preparation phase. Let's get to the really fun part, the execution. But here is where a lot of founders jump straight to visuals without laying that foundation. I think this is a very important to not skip. If you already have a branding in place and you're a bit a later stage startup, start with a brand audit and really make sure to check what is working, what isn't working, and also make sure that you compare your brand to competitors just to get an understanding how the landscape looks like and also how you can be distinctive to the others in the field.
Yeah, and I think this audit really sets the stage here because after that, it's about defining your brand strategy. So what makes you genuinely unique? And this is the foundation for all the creative decisions afterwards. So for example, Wise kept their recognizable fast flag logo, but they updated their color scheme to feel more global and inclusive.
And if your startup is already a bit bigger, it can help to test your concepts, whether it's with focus groups or customer service. I think gathering feedback early really helps avoid costly mistakes. And when I say that, Christian, do you by any chance remember what happened when Tropicana rebranded their famous orange juice?
Yeah, I think Tropicana was this orange juice which you always wanted to have as a kid, but were never allowed to drink or something like that.
Exactly. But also in 29, they tried to update its packaging to look fresh and modern. And what happened next was a big disaster because customers, like your parents or even the kids, couldn't find their favorite shoes on the shelves anymore, and sales dropped by 20%. So just to say, before you jump into a full-blown rebrand and renaming exercise, remember that repositioning your company might already do the trick for you, and you don't lose brand equity that you've already built up so far. And I think you avoid a lot of hassle and disappointment and even sales drops. So think wisely when you go into that exercise. But now let's move to the launch phase. Christian, you came on board after the Yokoy rebrand. What stood out to you then?
Yeah, I think honestly the internal rollout, because here again, right, speaking as a not marketing person, I think so many things around rebranding are often connected to how you communicate to external stakeholders, but then your employees are really your first ambassadors. And if they are not on board, the rebrand won't stick externally, I think. So training sessions, workshops, whatever it takes to help your employees and your team understand and embody the new identity, this is really worth the effort. I think we had like 300 plus handwritten cards to inform also our customers before the big media launch. And that brought a very personal touch, obviously, to the whole endeavor. It's been crazy to see that from one day to the other, everything from the website, email signature, social media handles, partner websites, everything was in our new branding. And that was named Yokoy instead of Expense Robot. And that's pretty cool.
I'm very glad that you're still remembering that, because let's say that it involved a few nights and a few night shifts, but in the end it all worked out, and I think it was really worth the sleepless nights. So we at Yokoy, we went with a big bang rollout, which worked for us. But just to be clear, in general, for startups, choosing the right launch strategy is here super critical, and a phased approach might also work. So this would then also give you time to adapt based on feedback. But either way, I think the most important thing is transparency with the rebranding. And again, like for those who are interested, check out ConvertKit's video series, because in my opinion, they really nailed this during the transition from ConvertKit to Kit by involving their audience every step of the way. Now that we had the 4 steps, we finally get to the last one. So let's talk about the post-launch period, or what I'd call the future. Christian, now that you've been part of Yokoy post-rebrand, what's one thing you think we could have done better?
I think one aspect which actually many of these intangible marketing activities like brand, PR, reputation struggle with, which is measuring impact and measuring it systematically and objectively in KPIs. I think startups should track metrics like brand awareness, website traffic, and customer sentiment clearly before and after a rebrand event. You can do surveys, NPS scores, and all these things to really gauge how does your audience resonate with what you have done.
Totally agree. And here, what I cannot overstate is really that consistency is key. Having a clear brand guideline and empowering your employees as brand ambassadors can really prevent drift over time. And it's also super important to remember that a rebrand isn't just a one-time project. It's really an ongoing effort that you have to do over and over again, and train your employees and make sure they're true ambassadors from when they come on board to when they go to the next company. But it's super important that you see it as a whole project of the whole company and not just the marketing department. Now, before we wrap up, I would like to add an additional point and talk about naming, because finding a new name is like looking for a needle in a haystack, I would say. So back when we were looking for a new name that we could use instead of Expense Robot, we made sure we created a list of criteria. So in our case, we wanted to have something easy to pronounce in different languages, something that can be trademarkable, that is memorable with an available domain. And we even had a bonus point for finding a name that is a palindrome, so a name whose letters mirror perfectly from front to back, which we managed to get. But honestly, keep your must-have criteria as short as possible. It's hard enough to find a name all founders agree on, so that you don't need to make your life harder than it actually is. And here, a great tool for evaluating names is Alexandra Watkins Smile and Scratch framework, which we'll link in the show notes. It's a free and super helpful tool for narrowing down options. And one last thing that I really want to make sure that everyone takes away with: don't stress too much about initial reactions. I really had to learn that because, of course, you take it personal and you think, why don't they like the new name? But people often prefer what they're familiar with. It's even in psychology a phenomenon that is called the mere exposure effect. So if someone says the old name was better, it's actually just human nature and they'll get used to it over time. So don't stress about that.
I think that's a perfect handover for our guest today, because she actually has a very interesting story to share. We're talking to Dr. Andrea von Kaenel today. She's the Chief Marketing Officer of Micro Online, and Micro Online rebranded from Le Shop in November 2020. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the companies, Micro Online is part of Micro. Micro is Switzerland's largest retail company and a cooperative with over 2 million members. Micro Online, or Le Shop, was founded in 1997 by Swiss entrepreneurs, and it became very rapidly Switzerland's first online supermarket and one of the world's first profitable pure players in online groceries. And after years of growth and strategic partnerships, it then rebranded to Micro Online to align with its parent company. And today, the platform offers over 12,500 products, from Micro's own brands to frozen foods and alcohol, and employing over 850 people across Switzerland.
So I would say, without further ado, let's dive into Andrea's interview and hear her perspective on rebranding with a corporate context. Enjoy.
Andrea, welcome to the show. Before we dive into the topic of rebranding, can you tell us something about online retail in Switzerland?
Hey, thank you so much. A very warm welcome from my side, and thank you for having me here today. Yes, I'm very happy to give a short introduction to the online retail market. And in Switzerland, the largest online share is, of course, in the home electronics sector, as we all know. And we have 43% of all the goods are already traded and ordered online, which is quite a bit. And if we compare to the toy sector, for example, it's 30% online purchases, as well as clothes and shoes. So a third of all clothes and shoes and toys are traded online. And then goes down. Furniture is about 17% less. And then we see the lowest share, of course, is in the food sector, where we have a market share of 3 to 4%, which is really low. That's Switzerland. And I would also like to take a quick look into the international online market share in food, because it's quite different. And in the UK, for example, we have already an online share of 12%. We remember Switzerland 3 to 4. Germany, 4%, also quite low. But for example, in South Korea, we have already an impressive 24% online share in food. So what are the reasons for the big difference? It's, of course, the digitalization of a country, the numbers of players in the market. So the more players we have in a market, the more online share we have. And above all, also, of course, the density of the branch networks in a country. So in Switzerland, we do have a lot of Migros and Coops around. You don't have to walk 5 minutes and you already have the next branch in Switzerland. So the online shares are therefore significantly higher in international comparison. And if we return to Switzerland, the market is currently dominated by two orange players. It's Migros and Coop, as we know. And Coop has around 45%, Migros Online about 49%. Migros Online is at the moment the largest online food delivery service in Switzerland.
And when we now go directly into the topic of rebranding, as far as I understood it, the decision to rename the company from Le Shop to Micro Online was made before you joined as a CMO. Can you share still a bit what led up to this decision, and which data, KPIs, or insights the decision was taken?
That's a very interesting question, because, why would you rename a very well-known brand in Switzerland as Le Shop was? But Le Shop was a very strong love brand, but particularly more in the French-speaking Switzerland. Le Shop was founded in the French-speaking Switzerland, so this is quite clear. And back in 2020, we had a Migros internal online share of 3.7 in the French-speaking Switzerland, whereas in the German-speaking Switzerland, we were at about 1.6 online share within Migros. So we can say that LeShop was like almost unknown in the German-speaking Switzerland. And we remember the international online food shares, which are today between 10 and 20%. This means that there is an enormous growth potential in general in that field, and especially in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. And one of the most important arguments for the rebranding was like the trust advantage and the value proposition associated with the Migros brand. Everyone in Switzerland know Migros, and Migros has a huge trust advantage. That was really the reason why we did this rebranding. And if you hear Migros online, you instantly know that you can shop the Migros assortment online, but LeShop was not so clear for the customer. And the rebranding should, of course, also lead to like many synergies with Migros, for example, in the areas of like product range, so the product from Migros. In terms of recruiting, Migros is really a strong brand in terms of employer branding, but also for new locations for warehouses. Of course, we can profit from Cumulus. And last but not least, super important, of course, also like the platforms, Migros.ch and the Migros app, which we can use for our shop, which is most important. So in other words, like better integration within the entire Migros world was the reason why we did that. And of course, the rebranding was really a strategic decision by Migros to be able to present itself more clearly on the market within the online food sector. And we have various long-term studies where we look at whether the people in Switzerland know Migros online. Especially we look at the channel and service awareness, for example. We go into detail into the funnel performance, into customer loyalty, customer happiness, and also in detail, for example, compare it with competitors in that case.
And you also mentioned you conducted long-term studies. What kind of research did you conduct before you even started the entire rebranding process?
As you already mentioned, I started in June 2020 and almost at the same time as our new CEO at LeShop Migros Online. The aim was to go live with the new service brand in November, which is only 6 months time. As we remember, in 2020, we had the first big Corona wave in Switzerland, and Corona had, of course, a massive impact on the online business. So orders, the number of new customers and shopping cart sizes rose on an absolutely above average rate due to COVID-19, and our daily delivery windows were fully booked for weeks, and we recorded over 1,400 more new customers those days. So our long-standing and also like existing customers were no longer able to order, and we had to set up a new warehouse in Pratteln within 100 days, and that's really super quick. Normally it takes years until building a new warehouse. And it was precisely during this very hectic time where we prepared the whole rebranding in the background.
How did you analyze your brand's strengths and weaknesses?
So we analyze in depth our customer satisfaction in a rolling study. So we check all the segments in detail, like the platform satisfaction, but also are they satisfied and is the whole information level enough? What about the service level, or also like the after sales satisfaction? So this is really a rolling study we're always doing with our customers.
What were the primary goals you wanted to achieve with this rebrand? You already hinted a bit, but can you maybe elaborate it a bit more?
Yeah, the goal was that it's intuitively clear that Migros Online is the online supermarket of Migros. Of course, we wanted to achieve higher growth rate, and we have more than doubled since 2020 in terms of like sales VP, but also in terms of employees at Migros Online.
In terms of the rebranding process in general and developing the brand strategy, can you walk us through the steps you took to develop the strategy of the new brand?
We didn't do the rebranding by the book, as I would do it otherwise, but we really just rolled up our sleeves and got an overview of what needed to be done first. We made a list of all the to-dos and assets we needed to rebrand, prioritized them, and worked through them.
And did you work there also with external agencies, or did you handle everything in-house? Or in general, who was kind of the core rebranding team?
We did the rebranding in-house, but with the support from an agency, as we had to organize the whole rebranding within 6 months, and we had a Corona as well, and a lot to do because of that. And we successfully switched all digital communications from green to orange on due date. So on one date, we really switched the whole communication from green to orange. So that means the website, newsletters, customer emails, and for example, also the whole performance marketing. However, we did not replace the physical products such as, for example, flyer, boxes, work clothes, or shopping bags immediately, but we gradually replaced them over time with the rebranded materials. Super interesting is that we have not received any negative customer feedback about that decision, and we have not had to waste any materials unnecessarily. So that was really a sustainability decision we took, that we use all the old brand materials until they're not anymore. So we still use green Le Shop boxes today, sometimes with the posts, so you can probably still see one or two today. And to the question of who was involved, I mean, entire marketing team was involved. That means like all the project managers we had like 3 designers on the projects. We had media manager. We have, of course, like copywriter, translator. It was absolutely not at all only the marketing team. Of course, many other teams in the company were involved, as UX team, category management, IT, and so on. So many teams were involved in the whole project.
Could you tell, like, a peak time, how many in numbers there were that were involved in this project?
It's really hard to say. I mean, I don't know, maybe on the core project were 20, 30 people involved, but like we had so many stakeholders, internal as well as external, from MGB. So we were really in exchange with a lot of colleagues also from the Mikrogenossenschaftsbund. And I mean, if you also count all our IT colleagues, I would say maybe 100, but that's really just like a guess.
Of course, yes. And I imagine such a big shift with so many people involved. How did you ensure the new brand would resonate with your target audience in a consistent way?
We informed the whole internal key stakeholders always via like town halls to give constant updates. We had status update meetings for the core team, and the entire process of the rebranding was fully transparent, always on Confluence and Jira, and feedback could be entered at all channels. So also like, we are really direct feedbacks, open questions at any time. And in terms of like customer communication, we kept our customers informed about the rebranding really at the due date via email and with a microsite, which we could update immediately if needed, and with a letter from our CEO in the order itself, for example. And of course, via like social media, the Mikromagasin. So we really used all the channels we had to communicate that rebranding broadly.
And there, just an additional question. You said everyone could feedback, and it's just imagining like you could like go on forever if you would take all the feedbacks, and there are many opinions about this. When you said you launched in November and the decision was basically taken in June, when was the date where no one could give feedback anymore, or was this really up until the last moment?
It was up until the last moment, really. And as we had such a big pressure also from the Corona side, there was not like huge, like loops around. So we were really focused on the prioritized tasks we had to do. And it went really well. So we worked together really well just because we had such a huge pressure. I think that you could be totally right that if we would have more time, million more questions would have come.
Interesting. I was leading the renaming and also the rebranding of our 1-year-old company, and it felt like a massive undertaking. I can only imagine how it must have been for a big company like yours. So what I would be interested is, what were some really unexpected challenges you faced during the rebranding process?
In addition to the transformation that is visible to customers, there is also like the internal dimension and the internal transformation and the associated change management in-house. And like the Le Shop self-image was that we are a startup, we are a French-speaking company, we are a logistic company. And through the takeover by Migros, it changed a lot internally. It's not only about the rebranding or the name or like the new service brand. It's really also about, like the self-image of us. So now, from one moment to the other, we are part of a large corporation, and people are afraid to lose some of their autonomy and flexibility. The management is now based in Zurich. From one day to the other, technology is really key. We have huge investments in infrastructure, and this also means that new skills are required in-house.
Wow. And this sounds like a lot, but how did you then overcome these challenges and insecurities also?
This transformation from a logistics startup in Western Switzerland to a technology-based subsidiary managed from Zurich is still ongoing today, and we have changed a lot internally. So our corporate language is English, and we have a product organization introduced, and we also manage our company with OKRs in 6-week cycles, for example.
Speaking of OKRs, how did you measure the success of your rebrand?
We always measure our success in the number of items sold. So the question is always, can we sell more product? That means, for example, more orders, or of course also larger shopping baskets.
Looking back, what were the most important lessons you learned from this rebranding experience? And what would you do differently if you had to do it all over again?
I would love to do it all over again. Actually, it was really a fun time with the team, really intense, but really good. And what I would change is that I would pay more attention to the internal change management. We just didn't have the time. And I learned that change management needs time, a lot of time and a lot of face time. We really have to exchange with the employees face to face. We have to listen a lot. Yeah, we just didn't have the time to do that. I would do that differently. And I would also start the planning of the entire project much, much earlier.
And if people now have listened to you and have additional questions, how can people get in contact with you and reach out to you?
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Hey, I'm on LinkedIn, Andrea von Kaenel, and I look forward to hearing questions or just inputs, and happy to discuss.
Andrea, thank you so much for being on the show with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And this was another episode of our Follow the Gradient podcast.
And now we would love to hear from you. How did you like it? What should we improve? Do you have any suggestions, ideas, or dream podcast guests? Please let us know.
Thank you and see you again next week.